Is it that we're sitting right here? Why is CDC located in this patch of land? And the answer is Coca-Cola. Robert Woodruff, who was the president of Coca-Cola, had an interesting background. He started working for a lead pipe organization here in Inman Park, and he got fired. He then enrolled in Georgia Tech, and he flunked out. He then enrolled in Emory, Oxford, and after one quarter, he was released with the notation that the only thing he seemed to know how to do was spend money and skip class. So how did his father reward him? He made him president of the Coca-Cola Company. And in this, he succeeded. He made this an international company, and during the Second World War, he said he would provide Coca-Cola any place in the world where the U.S. had servicemen and women. And that's how he got bottling plants all over the world. But as part of that, he became a friend of General Eisenhower's. When Eisenhower became president, he had a group of people that they called the Millionaire Club, who used to go with Eisenhower and golf in different places. Well, Woodruff, by that time, had been appointed to the board of Emory University. So remember, he failed at Emory. But now he's on the board at Emory University. And I think there are 7 buildings at Emory named Woodruff buildings of one kind or another. He became very interested in education and what Emory was doing. But he had a plantation, and on the plantation, his workers were getting malaria. These new people that came in for the malaria control program began advising him on what to do, and he was forever grateful. And then he wondered, could he combine these two interests of Emory and CDC? So what did he do? He gave land that we're on right now to Emory to give to the U.S. government to build CDC here. Nothing happened. And he didn't realize how appropriations worked and how long it took and so forth. So he called Eisenhower one day. Now this is before cell phones. So you won't appreciate this, how hard communications were. But he got Eisenhower on a golf course in Denver because the Secret Service had communication facilities. And he asked Eisenhower, do you have paper and pencil? And Eisenhower said yes. He said, I gave this land to the government to build CDC, and nothing's happening. Eisenhower said, if you can put that into a paragraph, send it to me, I'll check into it. And Woodruff said, no, that's why I asked if you had paper and pencil. And the story is, within weeks, there were bulldozers working here. That's why we're right here, Coca-Cola. Number 3, why does CDC have such an international health reputation? Why is it the gold standard? And it really is. Well, number 1, I think it's because it started with malaria. So it was thinking globally from the beginning. Number 2 was the smallpox eradication program, where the director of CDC, Dave Sensor, told over and over again that he could not spend domestic money for global health. Said, smallpox is a domestic problem. The way I'm going to protect Americans is to put money into the smallpox eradication program, and CDC contributed 300 people to that program so that the World Health Organization could actually succeed. But then we had Alex Langner come and start the Epidemic Intelligence Service. And the Epidemic Intelligence Service started because the U.S. was worried that Korean hemorrhagic fever during the Korean War had been introduced purposely by China. It wasn't until the 1970s when I visited a virology lab in China, that I heard the story. This lab started because we thought the Americans had introduced Korean hemorrhagic fever. So both sides were wrong, and both cases, it improved the science that was being conducted around this problem. And 4th, why is global health so important these days? When I went to school, I could not find people interested in global health. I mean, this is hard for you to believe when you have a room full of people interested in it. I could not find mentors who were interested in global health. And when the history of global health is written, we will find that the tipping point occurred about the year 2000 due to one family, the Gates family. They have made global health something that people understand, where there are now ways of doing education and research into global health. I have two grandchildren in the audience here today, and one of them is interested in global health. But he was 7 or 8 years old when the two of us were in the car. He was sitting behind me when he asked me, what's the most important thing people could do to make the world better? And I keep thinking about that all these years. The other one, Ella, asked me just months ago, in the middle of doing homework, she stopped me and she said, I don't know what she was thinking, but she said, if you died this week, what is the advice you would have wished you had given me? And so I keep thinking about that. And some months ago, I was invited back to the Gates Foundation annual meeting. When I started with them, we could put our global health team around a table. They now have 1,500 employees. And so I was invited back, and Bill Gates interviewed me for 30 minutes in front of these 1,500 people. And he said, I have heard that you have 10 suggestions for the foundation. I'm curious, why did you even think that way? And I told the story about Ella saying, if you died, what advice do you wish you'd given? So I said, if I died this week, what's the advice I would have wished I had given the Gates Foundation? Now these are all mid-career people at the Gates Foundation. I'm going to give you the advice I gave them, the 10 suggestions. And so you may not even have to go on to school now once you have this information. Number one, be mindful. The difference between you as professionals and the people who benefit from the programs you put in place, the difference is very small. And by and large, it's due to chance. Statistically, I should have been born in a village in Africa or Asia, and I wasn't. And so I had the ability to go to school and to learn. Be mindful, listen to those people, and remember what my deputy used to say all the time at CDC, Bill Watson, there is never an excuse for bad manners. Number two, avoid certainty. Richard Feynman, the physicist, said, certainty is the Achilles heel of science. It's also the Achilles heel of religion and politics and almost everything else, certainty. When I went to school, we had a chart on the wall that said that hydrogen was 1 for the atomic weight. Oxygen was 16. You know what it says now? Hydrogen is 1.0094 plus or minus. There's no certainty. Oxygen is 15.999 plus or minus. It all depends on other things. So be careful of certainty. And Richard Feynman made his point by saying he was shaving one day. And as he was shaving, it suddenly struck him. Physicists have been so certain about why left and right are reversed in the mirror. And it struck him that could not possibly be true, or top and bottom would be reversed. And it caused him to go back and think all over. So avoid certainty. Number three, seek satisfaction. The thing that I can tell you with some certainty, if you're interested in public health and global health, you're not likely to get rich. It might happen, but you're not likely to get rich. And number two, you're not likely to be thanked. If you go into clinical medicine, you'll get thanked all the time. If you go into public health, you won't. And I tell the story of Pearl Kendrick. At the time I was a child, she was working for the state health department in Michigan. She developed pertussis vaccine. When she died in 1980, the dean of the University of Michigan School of Public Health, Dick Remington, wrote a piece about her. And in the piece it says, hundreds of thousands of people are alive because of Pearl Kindred. And he said, can you name one? He said, I can't either. So people did not thank her because they didn't know they were alive because of her. But he said she was secure in her satisfaction of what she had done. So if you can get beyond not being rich and not being thanked, you can find real satisfaction. Number 4, find mentors. And this will be up to you. Mentors are not going to come and volunteer to be your mentor. You have to find these people. When I was at the Gates Foundation annual meeting, I said, here in Seattle, 60 years ago, I attended medical school and I could not find 2 people interested in global health. But I said I found one, and his name was Ray Ravenholt, and I started working for him at the Seattle King County Health Department after school and on Saturdays. And what he said to me was, there is no path into global health. You have to make your own. But he said the best way to do this might be for you to go to Atlanta and try to become an EIS officer. And he said, you will meet people that will be your friends for the rest of your life, that you will have a way of talking to people about global health. And I said, I followed his advice. That's what I did. And I said, remarkably, he's still alive here in Seattle, 93 years of age. And I said, even more remarkable, he's in this room. And with that, he stood up and the spotlight went on him and he got an ovation that went on for minutes. Find mentors. How do you find them? The easiest thing is identify people that you want to tell you how to live. Because mentors pass on civilization from one generation to the next. Find people you really admire and then ask them a question in their field. Wait a couple of weeks and go back and ask a follow-up question. And by the time you've done this 3 times, they don't know it, but they become your mentor. So you can trick them into this, and that's what you have to do. It's one of the 2 best predictors of how people will do after they graduate. Did they have a mentor? And the second best predictor is, did they have an experience that was the equivalent of an internship where they were able to use what they were learning under supervision while they were learning? So remember those 2 things. Number 5, continue to be learning, not learned. The world quickly passes the learned, but not the learning. Number 6, think globally. Einstein said, nationalism is an infantile disease. He said it's the measles of mankind. Every place on earth is both local and global at the same time. So that if you spend your life in Atlanta, you're still doing global health because it's local and global simultaneously. You can't help but do global health, but think that way, think globally. Not just in a geographic sense, but also in terms of knowledge. There was a professor at Yale by the name of Professor Pelican who used to say that the difference between good scholarship and great scholarship, with good scholarship you can kind of predict on the basis of where did the person study, who were their mentors, what did they work on, but he said great scholarship depends on how much you know outside of your field. So be inquisitive about everything. So want to know about the weather and about politics. Well, okay. Anyway, find out as much as you can outside of your field because it will, in fact, help you in your field. Think long term, not just in terms of years, but in terms of centuries. I used to go once a year to my wife's preschool classes with a white coat and a stethoscope and x-rays and all of this, and talk about health. And one time, a 4-year-old girl asked me a question that immediately I said, this can't be an accidental question. She asked me, do doctors have bosses? Now, think of that. Wouldn't you like to follow her career? Do doctors have bosses? A few weeks later, I'm at a UNICEF symposium, and I used that story and asked, who are your bosses? And they immediately came to the right conclusion that their bosses were all the children of the world. But I said that's inadequate. Your bosses are really all the children of the world plus any child that will ever be born in the future. If you're thinking that way, then you realize they have given you their proxy. And they're just hoping you use it correctly. That you're thinking of them, even though you will never know them. And worrying about the world you're creating for them. Number 8, think big. There's a whole science now around scarcity, showing how people think differently and brains probably change physically around scarcity. And it all came from a man by the name of Ansel Keys at the University of Minnesota who worked on nutrition. During the Second World War, he had a group of conscientious objectors that he starved, and then he tried to bring them back to health using different approaches because the U.S. knew they would be coming to prisoner of war camps, and they wanted to know how best to rehabilitate people. And he has a huge book. And when I worked in the relief action in the 60s in Africa, I went through that book. But there's one footnote that caught a worker at Harvard. And the footnote was how they began thinking of nothing but food. They developed recipes and cookbooks because they were starving, and this is all that they could talk about. And so this professor started looking at the science of scarcity and said, it's true, whether you're talking about scarcity of food or water or sex or power or resources, that you start thinking in a different way. He said, give me a rich person, allow me to make that person poor, and in 1 month they will be thinking like a poor person. And so from the outside, we say, looking at poor people, well, why don't they vote? Why don't they do this? Why don't they help themselves? They can't. They cannot think that way. And so this is the way we were 50 years ago in global health. We thought like poor people. We never had enough resources. We were always trying to preserve the few resources we had. We could not think big until the Gates family started putting money and allowed us to think in a different way. So think big. Number 9, improve on history. I was asked many years ago to speak to the Emory board about what I hoped my children would get out of college. And the night before, I was reading Kipling. Now, Kipling is able to put some big ideas into a few words, but sometimes he's absolutely wrong. And I read what he had written about the talk slid north and the talk slid south through the sliding puffs of the hookah mouth. 4 things greater than all things are women and horses and power and war. And I knew that's not what I wanted my kids to get out of college. And so I had the audacity that night to rewrite Kipling to the way I would like my children to see it. And the talk slid east and the talk slid west. And a student asked, which life is best? 4 things value all else above: purpose and faith and wisdom and love. It's an improvement on history. Number 10, last, I said, find home. And I took one sentence out of the book, Cutting for Stone. Home is not where you are from. home is where you're needed. And I said, I hope you all find your way home. And finally, a word about the book. Some of you had a chance to look at this. These are stories from CDC, just stories that I like. The Legionnaire story, and how much difficulty we had, not because of the science, although that was terrifically difficult, but because of the politics, and how politicians were deriding CDC, and particularly one by the name of John Murphy, who said CDC thinks of itself as being scientific, but other scientists do not think of them in the same way. And he had hearings, and he was really very difficult. When CDC discovered the Legionnaire's organism, Dave Sensor had the good sense to call Congressman Murphy and tell him we've now discovered what the cause of this is. And Murphy's response was, well, it's about time. And 2 days later, he put out a paper saying he was confirming the cause of Legionnaire's disease. And then I end that chapter with just a footnote telling about how he was arrested for accepting a bribe and was now in prison. And I like doing that as a footnote and not as the story itself. I enjoyed writing the AIDS story, where Jim Kern is very much involved, and how science wins out at the end in determining who actually discovered the virus. But I enjoyed most, I think, the very last chapter. So if you read nothing else, read the last chapter, because it is totally unbelievable, even to me later, that I was given a chance at my last budget cycle to make appeals. And this happened every year. The CDC puts in a budget, goes to the Public Health Service. Public Health Service takes out things. It goes to the department. They take out things. It goes to OMB at the White House. They take out things. And then it comes back down. But at the end, you're given one last chance to make appeals. And so the appeals process was a Monday morning. We were gone that weekend, came back on Sunday night to find someone had broken into our house. And it totally disrupts you. Police are out there. We didn't get to bed till late. Had to get up early to catch the plane to Washington. I was not in a good mood. And I get to the Public Health Service, and they have a pre-meeting where they tell us for the first time, agency heads will not actually speak at this meeting. And so I wonder, why am I here? And so we go to the secretary, Richard Schweiker, and the first agency to be presented by the budget people is NIH. And sure enough, the head of NIH never said a word. The next one was CDC. Two budget people became confused within the first 30 seconds because two numbers didn't add up. And the secretary watches them trying to solve this problem, and he gets a bemused look on his face. And he said, Bill Foege is sitting right here. Couldn't we just ask him? And then he said, totally out of the blue, to me, would you present CDC's appeal? And now the budget people are out of this. So I presented the first two in a matter of fact, I hope, professional way. But on the third one, OMB had taken money away from our immunization budget. And one of the things you will learn is that immunization is the foundation of public health. And it's modern public health really started in the spring of 1796 when Edward Jenner did his first vaccination, taking material from the cowpox lesion of Sarah Nellens, a milkmaid, inserting this into the arm of James Phipps, and then some weeks later trying to give Phipps smallpox, and he couldn't. That's a whole different story. But that was the beginning of modern public health. So immunization is really a foundation. And so I became a bit emotional as I said to the secretary, I was burglarized this weekend and it bothers me. But I'll get over it. But I said, what I can't get over is OMB stealing health from the American people, and no one seems to be able to stand up and say this is wrong. And he whirled around to his people and said, give them all 3 appeals. Then he asked me, did you know it was going to be that easy? And I said, no. He said, because I'm curious, if you had known it was going to be that easy, what's the 4th thing you would have asked for? Well, I looked at my boss, Ed Grant, who put his hand on his forehead because here I was breaking all the rules, and one of the things they had told us at the Public Health Service meeting, there will be no capital expenditures in the budget. And if anyone tries an end run, we're going to take that amount of money out of their budget from someplace else, and you won't get your capital expense. But here was an opportunity that I couldn't resist. So I told the secretary about the fact that we now had about 80 Class 3 and Class 4 agents. These are agents where we have no vaccine, we can't prevent them, we can't treat them, and they have to be handled one at a time in really secure conditions. And I told him we were in a position at CDC we could only deal with one at a time. And if a new unknown came in, it would take us 3 days to clean that lab and start with the new one. So I said, if we had a big problem, as we do over the years with Ebola and Lassa fever and other things, it won't take any time at all for the United States to know we can't deal with it. And he turned to his budget people and he said, we have to at least try. He called me a week later at night. I was at home, he was in the White House, and he was giddy as a child. He said, I've just gone head to head with the head of OMB, David Stockman, and if you're old enough, you'll remember that name, and you're getting your new lab. And he said, you scared me so much, we're not even going to wait till next year. We're going to put it in this year's budget. You'll never have to defend it. And so when that lab was dedicated, Jim Mason, who was then head of CDC, invited me. And I'm sitting in the audience and I'm hearing these great speeches about what can be done in this lab and what it required to get the lab. And I thought to myself, there's no one else in this room that knows we owe this lab to 2 bungling budget people and 1 unknown Atlanta burglar. Jim said there's another book out, and I have some copies that I'll have outside if anybody wants to buy it, on the history of the task force. And it's simply a history of, in the 1990s, we had done such a good job of immunization in this country that vaccine-preventable diseases were just as low as they had ever been. And Robert McNamara, the former president of the World Bank, and Jonas Salk went to Rockefeller Foundation saying, how can we transfer this approach globally? WHO had a good program, but they were only covering about 15% of children at the world at that time. And so a task force was formed because the head of UNICEF and the head of WHO came to me and said, we have such big egos, we have trouble getting along with each other. It's no wonder that our agencies have trouble. And asked if we would form a task force to help them work under 2 conditions. Never use the word that would give the idea that they were responding to someone else. And so we couldn't say that this was coordination. They said, no, our agencies will not be coordinated by anybody. But we used the word facilitation. And number 2, they said, you can never get a profile higher than either one of us. And we said we would do that. In 6 years, the level went from 15% to, at the time of the Summit for Children, September 30th, 1990, Jim Grant, the head of UNICEF, was able to announce that 80% of children in the world had now received at least 1 vaccine. He said it's the biggest peacetime effort the world has ever seen. And so this program, which resulted from a 1-week meeting in Bellagio at the Rockefeller Center, has now led to 3 different programs, each one of them worth more than $1 billion in global health. So yes, I envy you, because we've had a great career and a great time, but you're going to be able to do things even better. And my last suggestion to you would be love science. Absolutely love it, but don't worship it. Because there is something better than science. And that's science with a moral compass. Science in the service of humanity. Science in the service of the future. And I wish you all a great year here in Atlanta. Thank you.